Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Rise of the Phoenix. This video is going to be the first in a new series that I'm starting. That's going to be faction deep dive videos. This video will be about Rohan. They seemed appropriate because they are the faction that I'm playing with my Season 1 restart group. In general, these videos are going to discuss briefly the faction bonus, the T4 troop, recommended commanders, recommended buildings, and then at the end we'll finish up with some boring politics stuff and talk about the faction's starting location. But before we get into that, if you enjoy my content, please do like this video and subscribe to my channel. Welcome back, everyone. We'll get right into it. First up, we will talk about Rohan's faction bonus. They get 4th Aerolingas, I think I said that correctly, which gives 3% army march speed. In my opinion, this is not a particularly exciting faction bonus, particularly when you compare it to things like Erebor's faster conscription, Mordor's more resources generated, Lothlorien's extra commander experience earned, and things like that. It is a nice little quality of life thing, but in general, your armies are probably always going to be marching around the map faster than anybody else because you're going to be running around with lots of cavalry most of the time, and cavalry are quick. So really, if you're traversing like a super far distance, I suppose it can save you a little bit of time, but in general, I would not rank this among the best faction bonuses in the game. Let's talk about their tier 4 troop though. So we'll go from a low note to a high note. Their tier 4 troop, the Marshal, is potentially the best tier 4 unit in the game. I mean, these, maybe not the best, they're definitely up there. These guys are absolutely crazy. They do tons and tons of damage, they're relatively tanky, and they are ridiculously quick with 157 speed. So overall, 34 to 40 damage. This is actually ever so slightly less than the T3 Cavalier, believe it or not. If we take a look at them, actually 34 to 42, whereas these guys are 34 to 40, so very, very minorly lower amount of damage, but it's no big deal because these guys have an amazing ability on them. 90 health is very beefy. I think Ram Riders are also 90 HP, and Cataphracts are like 94. I guess I can just go ahead and pull it up. Yep, 94. So Cataphracts do have a little bit more health and a little bit more defense, but compared to the Cavalier, the T4 unit, the Marshal, does have more health and more defense, which is nice. What makes these guys so freaking good, though, is this ability right here, Onslaught. At 10 of 10, 56% damage increase, which is modified by their speed stat, and it takes effect on multiple hits. So that's the real reason that these guys deal tons and tons of damage, so much more damage than the Cavalier, because if you look at the Cavalier's ability, it only goes off on the first instance of damage. It only goes up to 50%, and it is not modified by the speed stat. That's why Marshal's having a super high speed is really important, and that's why you want to use, in general, commanders that have speed and or like to use items that increase their speed as well. Speaking of commanders, let's talk about some commander recommendations. The most obvious choice is Éowyn as Rohan. You start off with her as one of your 2 starting commanders, and that is absolutely fantastic because she is great. I just released a video guide about Éowyn in case anybody wants to learn more about her in depth. In general, you really need her to be Respect 5. This is the build I have been using. She's okay at below Respect 5, but what makes her super powerful is White Lady of Rohan that heals your mounted units every single round and gives them stun immunity at all times. Extremely powerful title. Definitely invest in her and take her to Respect 5 if you can, if you're playing as Rohan. Gandalf the Gray, I'm probably going to recommend this guy in like every single one of my good side commander video or faction videos. This guy is just, I mean, he's ridiculous. Like, there's nothing more to say. This guy is just absolutely crazy. He's good at everything. He's good at PvP. He's good at tiles. He's good at farming neutral mobs. Like, there's nothing that he's not good at. This is the build I'm using right now for him. If you want to take a quick screenshot of that. In general, I prioritize Mithrandir and White Council as the most important abilities. I'm hopefully going to record like a really in-depth Gandalf the Gray guide soon, because once he hits Respect 5, his builds actually get like kind of weird and crazy depending on what he's doing. So this is a commander that you'll probably reset his skills quite frequently, depending on whether or not you're doing PvP or farming neutral units or PvE or what have you. But this is what I've been running for 200 and 230 tiles, and he's able to solo both of them relatively easily. As far as other recommended commanders, I'm going to have to go to the tavern for this one. We haven't gotten the Theoden Éomer chest yet. So as far as, let's do 2 of each tier. I think that's probably pretty fair. So from T1, I would say Éowyn and Dwalin are going to be your best options, primarily Éowyn. From T2, you're definitely going to want Gandalf the Gray, and you're going to want Theoden. Éomer is also good, but Éomer and Theoden share a respect item, and Theoden is better than Éomer in my opinion. But you're really going to want to push this guy to respect 5 as well if you can. He's not anything special below that, but at respect 5, he gets Horsemaster, which gives plus 15 base damage to mounted units and 5 health to all mounted units. This title is just absurd. Absolutely absurd. He also heals mounted units every single round, and he has Rohirrim just like Éowyn. So this guy, I mean, he is right up there with Gandalf the Gray. Probably not quite as good as Gandalf the Gray, but he's absolutely an S tier commander, and if you're playing as Rohan, you just gotta use him. He's just so good. And then for tier 3 commanders, I would say Gandalf the White, Galadriel, and an honorable mention to Aragorn, King of Men, particularly if you can get him to respect 5, which is going to be pretty tough. I think Gandalf the White also needs respect 5, but anyway, Dunandine Bloodline is actually quite similar to Theoden's respect 5 title. So at 7 points, this is going to give men units plus 14 base damage, which is very close to Theoden's plus 15 on mounted units. It also gives some defense, and it helps a lot because when your army is hit with stuns or madness, well, I should say it helps a lot in the right situations. But anyway, when your army gets hit by stuns or madness, for men units, which you're always going to be running on this guy at respect 5, let's be honest, they take a ton less damage, which is very nice, so you don't just get shredded by like Sauron in the first couple of rounds. Your army just doesn't shred itself in situations like that. Gandalf the White being good as well, but again, respect 5. Horsemanship is nice, and he just has a bunch of other good stuff, like White Council, like Wizard. You just get to put 1 point in this to stun things. Pretty insane in my opinion. And he does have some healing. But it's tough because on these T3s, getting them to respect 5 is pretty tough. But I mean, honestly, just get Theoden, get Éowyn, get Gandalf, and you'll be fine. Like, those 3 commanders can keep up with almost anybody in the game. Don't feel like you need a tier 3 to succeed as Rohan by any means. Theoden and Gandalf the Grey, in terms of power level, in my opinion, are pretty much right up there with, like, they're probably actually better than most T3 commanders in the game, to be honest, I would say. If I was doing like a full comprehensive tier list of every single commander in the game, I'd probably put Witch King and Sauron and like respect 5 Gandalf the White ahead of these guys, maybe Galadriel. But other than that, these guys are fantastic. And Éowyn isn't quite as good as Theoden, but she's still really, really good. So that is the commanders that I would recommend investing respect in and also spending your time leveling those guys, at least in the early game, until you can level a whole bunch of stuff by mock battling on a 300. Let's take a quick minute to talk about which buildings I recommend. Oh, apparently I can build a building right now. I'll have to look at that in a minute. So one thing that I like to advise people to not do is build extra unit buildings unless you're going to use those units right away, because in the early game your resources are going to be really like they're a major bottleneck. And so like I don't want to spend all this stuff, although my resources now are much better. But in the first week or so, I think we just hit day 10. The first week or so, you're pretty much always going to be at 0 resources. So like I don't want to spend these resources to get a level 1 warden trading ground when, as Rohan, I'm probably actually never going to run these guys at all. I mean, maybe I will at some point in the right situation. But the buildings I would focus on, you're going to have to get your light cav stable up for chapter objectives. You have to do bowman range for chapter objectives. And you have to take ranger to 3, and that's where I left it, because I don't particularly care for Dunandine for taking tiles. Maybe that's a mistake, but that's just me. And obviously you have to do Marshal stable. You want this anyway, because these guys are amazing. Other than that, I think the horseback archer stable is very good, because bow knights are awesome for 200 tiles, and they are even better when they are led by Eowyn, because Rohirrim damage bonus does apply to them. The one thing to consider is if you're itemizing for a cutlass, that only affects melee unit attack, and frontline rescue only affects melee units as well. At this point, I've actually transitioned my Eowyn, now that I have marshals. She's running full melee cavalry. However, I'm still giving bow knights to my Gandalf the Gray, so I'm still making use of that. Dwarf place, I put 1 point in the Goat Rider stable because there was a period of time between the Durin's Folk quarters and the Númenórean quarters where I wanted to be able to recruit 3 melee cavalry units. And so I just put 1 point in the Goat Rider stable because for 1 point I unlock Goat Riders, and they're alright, they're not bad. But as soon as I could, I replaced them with knights and then cataphracts from the horseman stable. And other than that, I mean, we're 10 days in, about to be 11 days in, really. And I haven't leveled any other troop buildings just because I don't plan on using them anytime soon. Maybe I'll get Master Thrower so that Gandalf can run like Bow Knight, Master Thrower, Cataphract for 200s or something like that. But in general, I've just been, you can actually see here, these ends, just ignore that. I should have never hired these guys. I was trying to test something out and man, don't worry about it. Cavaliers, Marshals, Cataphracts, and then when I need to, I pick up Bow Knights, but right now I have not that great of resources, and I have plenty of extra Bow Knights, so I really just need to recruit melee cav to tank for me. But it's all good because Cavaliers and Marshals, they just do tons of damage anyway. So I think you can make it really far just focusing on cavalry. Surprise, surprise. Part of it's going to depend on your commanders. I decided to go really heavy into Eowyn and Gandalf the Gray. As you can see, they are by far my two highest level commanders. I do have Aragorn coming up, but other than that, I've been very happy with this unit selection, and I think you can go really far with it. We will wrap up the video by talking about politics. Suppose I should turn on faction color to do this. So one thing that I've heard very frequently is that Rohan's starting position is really bad because you're surrounded by enemies. And I think that's just a case of people looking at the map and seeing a whole bunch of nearby colors that aren't green. But I think they have potentially the best starting location in the game. And the reason is you have Isengard to your west. Well, on almost every single server, Isengard is a dead faction, so you don't really have to worry about them most of the time. Even if they're not a dead faction, you have a critical crossing separating you and them, and these things are not particularly easy to take in the early game, having 20 million total HP. And if you're really worried about it, you can always capture your side. That way, they're going to have a war buff in order to take your side, because in the early game, there's no way they're going to be dealing 10 million siege damage without a war buff. I mean, even in the late game, that'd be a lot of damage without a war buff. So you can always take your side. I mean, potentially even take their side before they do if you want to, but that'd probably make them mad. But yeah, take your side, makes it easy to defend because they need the war buff, and hopefully you'll see it coming. Now, we'll talk about Gondor, which is potentially a popular faction. The only way to get to you is through caves, or I guess if they came up like through these caves into Entwash or something like that. Either way, it's not actually super easy for Gondor to get to you, even though you guys are so close. In this server, we have a deal going on with Gondor right now. Hopefully it lasts. I guess we'll find out. I'm not going to talk about it in the video. But it's not particularly easy for Gondor to come north through, straight up to Edoras. And more importantly, Gondor really wants to go east to prevent Mordor from getting Mumakils, because Mordor with Mumakils is a huge pain, huge headache. So they're incentivized to go east, which means if you don't do what we did on most servers, don't just come down and take their neutral territory. They're going to want you as at least some sort of non-aggression agreement going on. They don't want to have to worry about Mumakils to their east and also Rohan coming down and attacking them. So I feel like politically it behooves both factions to work together somewhat. As far as Lothlorien goes, you have a relatively easy crossing right here that you can set up as a mutual border. And you'll see them moving through Fangorn. This whole area of the map is actually kind of difficult to traverse in general. Like it's not as easy as just walking a straight line between your two capitals. So you can easily set this up, or I don't think I would forfeit Fangorn for reasons I'm about to talk about in a minute. But if you were like super worried about something going on, you could say, hey, let's be friends. You can have Fangorn and we'll be nice and it'll be great. But I probably wouldn't do that most of the time. We'll talk about that in just a minute. So really, your only enemy that is somewhat nearby is Mordor, except they're going to want to go west to get Mumas, because we know that Mordor with Mumas is a massive headache, and they're not going to want to like run across the dead marshes in the early game to come and attack you, I wouldn't think. This is not a particularly great area, and since they can't capture the dead marshes, when they're fighting you, their reinforcement time, they can't relocate into here. When they're fighting you, if they do attack you, their reinforcement time is going to be super long, whereas you and your 200 best friends can just relocate right on this border here, and you'll have like 2-second reinforcements, which should help you quite a lot. So I really don't think they're as surrounded by enemies as most people say they are. And then you have access to Fangorn. This has got to be one of the best places in the entire game. I mean, I know about Treasure Island by Gondor. I know about the place with all that farmland in Rune. But what makes this so good is you have like literally endless 150 power tiles. I mean, we're a pretty big faction. We have a lot of people, a lot of active players. Now you can still find 150s in here that are open. But more importantly than that, I mean, there's a ton of 200s and 230s as well. More importantly than that, you have Ents, which is one of the best XP farms in the game. These guys don't really do damage. They're led by Merry and Pippin, who are not threatening commanders, and starting at like level 38, 40-ish, maybe even earlier depending on your gear and your respect and all of that, you can start farming these guys and gain tons and tons of EXP per 20 stamina that you spent. If you capture it, just be nice and drop the tile, unless you're going to make a big mistake like I did and actually recruit these things. Don't recruit them, by the way. Just drop the tile and let you and your friends farm the EXP on them. So Not only do you have relatively safe borders, unless all three of those factions, I guess all four of the factions we just talked about, unless somehow they all decide to gang up on you, you have relatively safe borders. You have a huge, massive resource farm. You have easy access to one of the best EXP farms in the game. And on top of that, you start quite close to Aemon Lake, which moving into here early might not be a good idea. It might piss people off. But if you do want to move into it early, you have even more 150s. Aemon Lake itself has plenty of 200 plus powered tiles, and you can get an early foothold in Dol Guldur if you so choose, if you want to go that route. As you can see, we've really started eating up the outskirts of Dol Guldur, but you can just see how many really, really nice resource tiles are in here. So honestly, the only thing Rohan's missing out on is a really solid neutral unit, but at least in Season 1, good factions don't really have access to super amazing neutral units now that Oathbreakers have been heavily nerfed. And most likely, if there's an active Gondor on their server, they're not just going to let you come down and take Oathbreakers from them anyways. So even though you're relatively close to Oathbreakers, you're probably not going to get there, but overall it doesn't really matter because they're not nearly as good as they used to be anyways. So that's it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something useful. Let me know what you think about Rohan down in the comment section below. Do you disagree with any of my commander choices, building choices, or with the fact me saying that they have the best starting location in the game? I'll see you in the next one. Rise of the Phoenix, over and out.